Hello, my name is Brian Lewis, and I'm an instructor with JT&S. Today, we're going to talk about loader backhoe safety, or also excavator safety. Really, what we're going to talk about can be applied to any piece of heavy equipment on the job site that's being used. Before we get started, though, I want to take a moment, allow you to pause the video, and talk about any near misses or accidents you may have had since the last safety meeting. Simply press pause, have a good discussion, and then press play when you're ready to resume the video. Okay, hopefully you had a good discussion and identified any kind of situations that you can avoid in the future so that people do not get hurt due to near misses. As I said before, we're going to talk about safety on and off the backhoe loader, and you might say, well, this is for operators. Well, I can understand that, but the truth of the matter is safety is everyone's responsibility. So remember, if you're on the job site, it's your responsibility to look after yourself as well as your co-workers. So keep that in mind. We're going to talk some very basic information here. The three basic components of your backhoe, trackhoe, excavator, whatever the heavy piece of equipment could be. We're going to talk about the loader. We're going to talk about the actual tractor itself, or the backhoe, and stabilizers. All that stuff is important. The bucket, the backhoe, the stabilizers, the front loader, and the tractor. All that stuff is important. We all come from different backgrounds, and there may be someone that doesn't quite know what we're talking about when we discuss these components. So you have the bucket. It's attached to the stick. It's all part of the backhoe attachment. Of course, there's a boom that goes along with the backhoe attachment. You have stabilizer legs or outriggers. You have the cab where the operator sits, the actual tractor, and of course the loader, or sometimes called the front loader. As anyone who operates a fork truck or industrial powered truck, as it's called in the OSHA standards, we need to have a daily checklist, and it's great if you formalize this list. It gives you some information, it gives you some history for that piece of machine, and that's important that we develop histories for the pieces of machine we operate and make sure we stay on top of any maintenance that's required or that may be unexpected that we can catch in the daily checklist. As you can see, we want to, of course, check the engine, make sure oil, coolant, hydraulic fluid levels, things like that are adequate. They're in the shape they need to be in. Of course, check for leaks and things like that. We want to check for broken and or dirty windows, anything that would inhibit the operator seeing the conditions on the job site around them in their field of vision. We want to make sure we check all the levers, all the buttons, make sure that they operate smoothly. Every piece of equipment probably is going to have a little different feel in how you operate the front loader and the backhoe, the stabilizers or outriggers. Even if they're the same make and model, one may have a few more hours on it than another, and that's going to affect the operation of that piece of equipment. Obviously, you want to check for brakes, got to stop. You want to check hydraulic hoses, even new pieces of equipment. At some point, after so many hours, most hydraulic lines, fittings, tend to have a leak. Any kind of significant leak that you observe, you need to address in some way or another, so keep that in mind. Check all the safety devices, make sure all the guards are in place, make sure they function correctly. All that stuff is important. Obviously, we want to inspect bolts, welds, pins for proper condition. Make sure that those things are in good shape and operating as they're intended. We want to inspect the ropes or the rollover protection system, rollover protection structure, however you want to say that, but it is important that the function of that canopy and the rollover protection system works correctly. It, along with your seat belt, can protect the operator if it's unfortunate enough to have some kind of rollover. Of course, you want to check the tires, inflation, make sure that missing valve caps, stems, that sort of thing, make sure none of that's happening, make sure it's all in place. Inspect the lights, gauges, make sure the horns and the alarms work properly. This is one way you can communicate with people on your job site. So it just stands to reason, make sure that they operate the way they're supposed to. Inspect the engine compartment, make sure it's all good and squared away, ready to go. And if you need any other kind of information, of course, you want to refer to the operator's manual. It's really important that we make use of this operator's manual, and it needs to be on the machine. It needs to be intact. It needs to be readable. This is going to be our guide when it comes to doing preventative maintenance and doing safety checks and making sure our machine is operating the way it was manufactured or intended to operate. All of that is important. Typical weight of components. I don't think it's quite necessary that you know the exact weight of any of these components because different models, different pieces of machinery are going to have a little bit different weight totals. Having said that, it is important to realize that the tractor itself is the heaviest part of the system. The backhoe is the second heaviest part of the system. The loader empty is the third heaviest part of the system. Some people, this is very intuitive. They understand this and they can operate a backhoe without thinking about this in great detail. Other people need to be reminded once in a while, or if you're new to a piece of equipment, need to realize that the backhoe is the second heaviest piece of the system, and the empty front loader is the third heaviest. Now, of course, you put stuff in the front loader, aggregate, whatever, you can change how much weight that is, obviously, right? So keep that in mind. What's really important when we talk about these machines is that we talk about the center of gravity. And this is true of any piece of heavy equipment. Anything you do with a backhoe, anything you do with the front loader is going to change. It's going to change the stability of the machine. And really what we're talking about is the center of gravity. So when the front loader is down and the backhoe is in its intended position or resting position, you have a relatively neutral position of the center of gravity. As the backhoe is raised and extended, it raises the center of gravity and it shifts the center of gravity from its neutral position towards the backhoe. Now, of course, if you're going to have something in the front loader and you're going to use the loader, you're going to get the same thing there as well. We talk about slopes. Stability decreases as the slope increases. There again, this may be really intuitive to some people. To other people, it may not be so natural to think of these things. So when you're on a slope relative to the wheel that's going down or the furthest down on the slope, the center of gravity is raised. And this, of course, is what makes the tractor, the backhoe, the excavator, whatever it may be that you're operating, that piece of heavy equipment, that's what gives it the potential and the tendency to tip down the slope. So we want to be aware of that. We want to take that into consideration. If you remember a few slides ago, we talked about that the tractor is the heaviest component of the system, the backhoe is the second heaviest component of the system, and the front loader, empty, is the third heaviest component of the system. So when you're talking about machine stability, you all obviously want to use the flattest path you can take. Having said that, you can use the weight of the backhoe both in a good type situation or in a bad type situation. If you take the backhoe and you extend it and raise it towards the top of the slope or uphill, you can offset some of the tendency for the machine to roll over down the hill. Conversely, if you take that backhoe attachment and you swing it down the slope, down the hill, you're going to increase the potential for that piece of equipment to turn over. So keep that in mind. Also, you can use the stabilizer bars, or you can use the outriggers to help with stability. That's really important that we look at those things. If you're a novice or a young operator, someone who haven't used a piece of equipment or a particular piece of equipment, even if you're an experienced operator, they all are unique in the way that they feel and they respond on the controls. So use this information and be very intentional on how you use your pieces of equipment till you get used to them and you know your piece of equipment. Obviously, machine stability can decrease. That's why they have stabilizers. It's why they have outriggers, so that you can help stabilize and keep the vehicle, the piece of equipment, as neutral as possible. And it's really important as you're digging or whatever you're using your backhoe for, the center of gravity is going to change as that part of the equipment changes or moves. And so those stabilizer bars, outriggers, are good parts, good safety devices that should be used and always used. And in fact, a lot of modern pieces of equipment have proximity sensors on the stabilizers or the outriggers and will not let you operate certain pieces of equipment until they've been deployed. So that's a nice safety feature and one we want to make use of if your machine has that. Of course, when you're working and you're not on a flat plane, a flat surface, you might want to make sure that your downhill stabilizer is deployed fully, so that it makes contact with the ground and supports the machine. And you may even need it to raise the tire slightly or take weight off the tires so that you can keep the piece of equipment level. And as we talked about before, when the bucket is pointed downhill, being the second heaviest component of the system, what it does is it decreases the stability of the system. Therefore, the stabilizers, the outriggers, nice safety feature to keep your piece of equipment level and keep it stable so that you can do your job effectively, right? So we've talked an awful lot about the backhoe part of the system, and sometimes we avoid talking about the loader, or what some people call the front loader. But as you gather material, whatever that material may be, and you put it in the front loader and you go to, say, put it in the back of a dump truck or whatever it is you happen to be doing, that is going to decrease the stability of that piece of equipment, that backhoe or that track hoe. Of course, the higher you raise that loader, the higher the center of gravity is going to go for the system. And so if you raise that front loader to dump aggregate and you're on a slope, you're really in a bad situation, and you really never want to load something with a front loader on a slope. It can really put you in a bad situation, quickly. So we don't want to do that, right? So driver responsibilities. So the driver, of course, is responsible for themselves. They are responsible for the machine they're operating, the people that are around them, and also property. And I will add a fourth to this list: citizens, concerned citizens, the public. As most of you know that have had any experience in utilities, citizens tend to really be interested in the work you're doing. There's a lot of them that just like to ask questions. They feel like they're getting some kind of inside knowledge, or maybe they just really enjoy knowing what's going on. So you're responsible for all these people, the machine, the property, as well as yourself. So keep that in mind. That's also why I say safety is not just one person's responsibility, it's everyone's responsibility. The people working around the machine should also take responsibility for the operator and help keep the public off the job site. So keep that in mind. So some things that can affect our awareness when we're operating these machines, or that when we're around these machines, are fatigue and hunger. In utility work, it's not uncommon to work extended hours due to breaks, line breaks, inclement weather, things like that. And so you start working long hours, you start going without food or some kind of snack, something to keep your energy up. It can absolutely affect your awareness. Weather, heat and cold, straightforward kind of stuff in the dead of winter when it's freezing outside and you're having to deal with the cold weather. It's something you have to mentally be strong and overcome. Same thing in the dead of summer when in Tennessee we have 90 plus degrees and 85, 90 plus relative humidity. And you've got to stay hydrated, but it really takes a while to get used to that kind of heat and that kind of humidity and let your body become acclimated to it. And in that time frame of acclimation, of course, you have to worry about being dehydrated, and the heat just and the humidity just saps out your awareness. So you got to keep track of that. Emotional level. When you're working a job site and things don't go your way, it can get irritating. And when you get irritated, you get a little emotional about things, and that can be a bad thing. In addition to that, none of us live in a vacuum. We all live lives with our families and friends outside of work. And sometimes when tragedy happens, sometimes when we have events that are beyond our control in our personal lives, sometimes we have a hard time concentrating on the task at hand in our jobs. And if that's something that's going on, you've got to try and fight through that, concentrate on the job, have people that you work with, people on your crew, be aware of those things and help protect each other, help each other out, right? Some other things that can happen that can affect operator awareness is physical health. Someone may be a diabetic, somebody may have high blood pressure or low blood pressure, they may have some other condition that makes it important for us to pay attention to what's going on with them, make sure that they have the appropriate sugar levels, make sure that they take their heart medicine, things like that. We've already mentioned some working conditions, but any working condition can cause awareness to wane, and so we want to make sure we pay attention to that. People, I've already spoke about concerned citizens, but the public, like I said, they find utility work interesting, and some of them want to come up and know as much as they can know, and some of them just like to offer their opinions on life in general. And at any rate, these people can interrupt our flow of work and be irritating. It's important to know you are, in many cases, the face of your utility. You have to be professional. You have to be polite, but you also have to stand your ground and make sure they don't enter the job site put themselves or someone else at risk when it comes to safety and health. So for safe operations, we don't want to take anything for granted. We'll make sure we keep in line with our company policies. When we get into the machine, we want to face the machine when we're climbing on and off. We want to keep the machine clean. Along with keeping the machine clean, we want to make sure our shoes are clean. Avoid loose clothing and jewelry. I cannot tell you how many times I've been involved in accident and fatality investigations where loose clothing and jewelry were the culprits in someone being pulled into a machine or amputations of fingers. So we want to avoid those kinds of situations if we can. Be particularly aware of loose clothing and jewelry. Make sure you keep that stuff in check. Don't allow it around heavy equipment or any kind of equipment with moving parts. Wear your PPE. Make sure that it's available. Make sure it's clean. Make sure it's adequate. Make sure it's ANSI certified. All those good things. Never operate the machine without the protective guards in place. Always check the height, width, and weight restrictions of your particular piece of equipment that you're putting in service. Keep all your safety devices in place in working order. A lot of these machines have proximity sensors and other type sensors that require certain things to be done in certain order before they can be operated safely. Do not bypass those proximity sensors. Make sure that they are in place and they're working correctly. Always plan ahead, and most of our presentations we mention job briefings. Whether it's actually in a slide, most of the time an instructor will mention job briefings, and job briefings are so important. They're opportunities to discuss and have a plan and make an effective plan for what's going to be done at the job site. To identify the objectives, the scope of work, and the safety concerns, whatever they may be, about what's going to be done in the scope of what is intended to be done. So do not bypass your job briefings. Make sure you do those. Make sure you do them well. If you've got concerns, step up to the plate and make your concerns known. Learn beforehand about the work area, anything that's in particular that you're going to need to know, need to do, need to address before you start at your job site, and make sure, just along with the job briefings, those things that need to be addressed are addressed. Seat belts. Now, I know a lot of people dislike seat belts. Okay, I understand that. They are restrictive and all those things. They are an incredibly important piece of safety equipment when we're talking about operator safety in backhoes, trackhoes, and heavy equipment. There's a lot of people that have a idealized version of their athletic ability, I'll say it that way, and they think the seatbelt can restrict them from coming out of the machine. If the machine tips or rolls over, I don't know of anyone that has the athletic ability to avoid being crushed or pinned by a rolling backhoe or trackhoe because they can move and jump and clear the machine. That's just not a very good plan, and it's not a realistic view of most people's athletic abilities. So I say that to say this. Make sure the seat belt's in good working order. Make sure the material is right, it's not frayed. Make sure the buckle works, latches like it's supposed to. Hopefully you do everything right and the machine never rolls over. Should it start rolling over, the best bet is to stay inside the confines of the cab until the machine stops rolling. At that time, you can get yourself out of the cab into freedom. Most accidents that occur are due to inadequate rollover protection systems or structures and people not wearing their seat belts. Look, if you wear your seatbelt, you may have some kind of burn. You may be bruised a little bit, but you'll be alive, and odds are, the statistics show, you will walk away from that accident. That's true for vehicles, over-the-road vehicles, as well as heavy equipment we use on job sites. When you're climbing on and off the machine, use 3 points of contact. Don't try to climb over the rear of it. When you dismount, do the same thing in reverse. Always face the machine, 2 hands, foot, mount. When you dismount, the same thing in reverse order. Job site safety. As I have said at least a couple of times in this presentation, the job site's everyone's responsibility. It's just not the operator of the heavy piece of equipment. It takes the people on the ground are just as responsible for safety. And so we've got to work together. In this particular case, you are your brother's keeper, your co-worker's keeper. It is important that you respect your job to maintain your own safety, as well as respect your responsibility to maintain the safety of an operator of a piece of heavy equipment, the other people on the job site, and the public. It's really important that we take that responsibility serious. It really is a serious thing. Because of that, there are certain areas that are danger areas when we're talking about operating equipment, especially equipment that has loaders, backhoes, or any other kind of moving parts to it. Those things, as well as cranes, create some really dangerous situations when the backhoe attachment, for example, swings. And so we want to be careful that if we're on foot, that the operator sees us, acknowledges us, knows where we're going to be, what our intentions are, whether that takes place through a radio, whether that takes place through hand signals. Effective communication must take place. Your head, your body is not going to withstand being hit by a bucket. So keep that in mind. We want to maintain safety, and it's everyone's responsibility. It's the operator's responsibility so that you do not come in contact with that piece of machinery. It's also your responsibility to address the operator in such a way that that operator knows where you're at. That's important. So anytime you enter the swing zone, like we've said before, make eye contact. Whether you use hand signals, whether you use verbal with a radio, or you can actually yell so that the operator can hear you, doesn't matter. Have to have effective communication so that the operator knows what your intentions are, where you're at, and what you're going to do. Don't make assumptions. Operator cannot make assumptions. The person that's on the job site cannot make assumptions either. Effective communication. This is an issue that needs to take place in the job briefing. People need to understand these things. They need to be repeated often. We cannot lose sight of this. This is how people get hurt and killed. The machine and ground workers should always, the operator should always be able to see the ground workers. You shouldn't sneak up behind an operator, and you should face the machine when you approach it. Make sure people can see your face and any kind of information you're trying to give them. Excavating hazards, I don't need to go into 811 or call 811 with utility workers in any great degree. You all know underground utilities, it's important that we do not disturb them. We need to know their location. We need to know if it's water, wastewater, electrical, or something else along those lines. We need to know the hazards that are involved, that are absolutely involved with those underground utilities. So make sure that that's well understood. Make sure everybody has a good idea of the location, and hand digging needs to take place at a certain point, that needs to be discussed and need to do it. The stabilizers can cause cave-ins, right? We've talked about this in trenching and excavation class. Yeah. One of the reasons that the spoil pile needs to be 2 feet away from the edge of any excavation and trench is because of the weight that it places on that side of the trench wall and can cause a cave-in. It is the same thing with the tires, the tracks, or the stabilizer outriggers of a backhoe, track hoe, or other piece of heavy equipment. When you place weight and stress on the face or of the excavation wall or the trench wall, you're creating a situation where you can have a cave-in. The only thing worse than the cave-in is that you have the cave-in and it destabilizes that piece of equipment such that it goes in after the cave-in. So we want to avoid all those kinds of situations if we can. Lifting loads with a backhoe. If you're going to lift and move the loads, follow the manufacturer's recommendations, the operator's manual, what the limits are, those kind of things. It's important to note, just like any piece of equipment, you pick up a piece or you pick up weight with the backhoe extended, the load limit is reduced as to what that piece of machinery can pick up. So keep those things in mind. Keep those things in mind. Like I said, make sure you use the operator's manual. Make sure you do what the equipment is capable of and not anymore. Not anymore. That's important. So controlling worksite access. Before the excavating works begin, you want to limit unauthorized persons. We've mentioned this before. Public, not everyone in the public, but a lot of people in the public are interested in what's going on, especially with utility work. You may need to put up barriers. You may need to use caution tape. People that are directing traffic and taking part in traffic control, they need to help and be a part of this process as well. So it's everyone's responsibility, but usually it's difficult for the operator of a piece of heavy equipment to affect that like someone can on the ground. So keep those things in mind. Transporting the machine. Preparing it to transport, locking the pins so that backhoes do not swing, that sort of stuff. Make sure that the front loader is down where it's supposed to be. Accelerate slowly. Tie down machines. Being able to foot everything correctly is important. We've talked about this in the past. It's really important that you use chains that are appropriate for the piece of equipment and its weight, that they are clearly marked according to DOT regulations. Our goal here is to keep that piece of heavy equipment from moving forwards or backwards or from side to side. Because that's our goal, it's important that these chains be in good shape, that they be rated for what we're using, and that they be at 45-degree angles. 45-degree angles. If you use anything less or more than a 45-degree angle, you're going to limit the effectiveness of that chain to keep the piece of heavy equipment from moving forwards or backwards or from side to side. It really does not matter how far you are traveling. If that trailer and that piece of heavy equipment goes on public road, you're responsible for it. You're responsible for it. So make sure your chains are appropriately marked. Make sure that the piece of equipment is in the spot it needs to be. And make sure you use 45 degrees on those approved DOT chains, or maybe I shouldn't say approved DOT chains, but chains that DOT looks for, and make sure they have the proper markings. Make sure that any of the links are not torn up. Make sure that if you're using straps, they're in good shape. All that stuff is important. All that stuff is important. If you need more information on that, there's information out there that you can get a hold of in the DOT regulations that spell that stuff out. So driving the backhoe to the job site, once again, seat belt control. We want to keep this stuff from bouncing around. We want to pay attention. We want to look out for the public. We want to make sure we make it to the job site safely. We want to make sure we don't tear down any kind of power lines or telecommunication lines on the way. One of the things that is important once the piece of equipment is offloaded, that the operator and those on the job site realize where the power lines are, and that you do not violate the minimum approach distance, which is in most cases 10 feet. In most cases 10 feet when you're dealing with distribution lines. So make sure you know how much power's on those lines. If you need additional distance besides the 10 feet for the minimum approach distance, then make sure you take care of that. If you need a spotter, you need a spotter. It's important. So I certainly appreciate your attention. I certainly appreciate you all watching this video. And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact your JT&S instructor. As I say always, we will try to answer every question. We may not know the answer right off the top of our head, but if you give us a question we cannot answer, what we will do is we will research it. We will get back to you, and we will discuss the situation and make sure that we do the things that are appropriate. Thank you all once again for listening. Thank you for watching the video. Have a great day. Have a great rest of the month, and I will see you all next month. Thank you. Bye.